Hey, everybody out there in Son of Sam land. Great to see you. Welcome to another Manny Monday. Hey, really glad you can make it. We got a great one for you today, folks. We are continuing our series of examining Berkowitz as a young man before the Son of Sam crimes. Who was he? What did he do? And so on and so forth. What crimes was he responsible for? So, to that end, we have a great guest today, Jim Fay. Jim Fay was featured in I think it was a Daily News article in 1978. It could have been the New York Post. Forgive me if I'm wrong on that. Where this guy, Jim Fay, actually was an eyewitness to Berkowitz committing arsons in the Bronx. And so he'll be here to tell his story. And we also have back with us the great, the one, the only, John Comparetto, Berkowitz's friend from childhood. And of course, it's really great getting to know all these guys because I had no clue that these guys even existed. But it turns out that there's a whole circle of people out there still young, still vital, still active, still with their memories sharp, who were all buddies, friends, and acquaintances with Berkowitz et al. Berkowitz and the people who he associated with in some cases. So we're going to talk today a little bit more about David Berkowitz, the young man, before he became the Son of Sam. And we're also going to talk today about a new character in the Son of Sam saga that has come up recently, who goes by the name of Patrick O'Shaughnessy, the mythical ex-Yonkers Police Department, who Maury Terry alleged was part of the whole Son of Sam operation. So without further ado, I want to welcome Jim. It's great to see you. And John, it's awesome to see you. So welcome to the show. Hey, guys.
Jim, go ahead, Jim. This is yours today. I'll help you along.
Jim, now we can't hear you. Yeah. Maybe you're muted. So anyway, while Jim gets his audio back up and running, that's funny because we were having some audio issues before we came on the air today, and Jim's audio was perfect. So, John, how you doing? It's great to see you. Welcome back to the show.
Good to be back. I actually enjoy speaking about these issues because I knew the good Dave Berkowitz, who was a good kid, and look, he did some horrible things, but he was a good kid. So any rumors I mentioned last time, a lot of them are nonsense. So I don't mind being back.
Right. Yeah. I mean, of course, that's kind of what it's all about. Just getting a feel for all these people as who they were as human beings is really, to me, very interesting. And of course, extremely interesting that there we go. Hey, Jim, let me just finish this thought, Jim. And of course, it's extremely interesting that the guy who later became psychotic. I mean, I think we can all agree that something happened to Berkowitz that turned him into a maniac. He is responsible for the deaths of 3 people by his hand. But he was a nice guy. I mean, we first met Maria, John, who of course you knew, and she said the same thing. Nice guy. In fact, her quote was, "He was a nice shy boy." I would love the way she said it too. It was with that Bronx accent. But yeah, so we'll talk a little bit more about that. Of course, John's an important eyewitness to some of the things that we're going to talk about today. So, Jim, thanks. Did you get that audio issue resolved?
I believe so. Have I?
Perfect.
Okay.
You have. And I just want to put out there for the audience's sake that we are also going to take calls today. You can restream in. I'm going to put in the chat right now the link. Do not press that right now, okay? Because we're not quite ready. We want to hear these 2 gentlemen's stories and testimonies before we take your calls. But I will periodically put up the link. And if anybody out there in audio in video land has any issues, like maybe my audio, I did an interview earlier today with Sean Atwood and I had to adjust my audio. So if I'm too low or too high, please put it in the chat and I'll make my adjustments. So we'll also put, of course, up in the chat messages as they come along. Hey, RTW, great friend of the show. Love the shirt, Manny. Hey, Jim and John. So thank you so much for all that positivity and good vibes. So Jim, welcome.
Thank you.
So, Jim, you're an important person,
Uh,
maybe for many reasons, but for us today, you're an important eyewitness to, well, the history, a little slice of history of Son of Sam, of the guy who was arrested for Son of Sam, I should say. So, real quick before we get into your story, Jim, please let the audience know exactly, how you came to possess this knowledge of David Berkowitz. Where were you in the '70s when all this was going on? How did you come into
70s.
this whole thing? And this, I hope you can remember, Jim.
Well, I know the basic details. They're a little hard to forget at this point. I was a dispatcher for the fire department in the Bronx during those rip-roaring '70s, and as the South Bronx burned, uh, the neighborhoods in the upper part of the Bronx, for geographical point, that's around Pelham Parkway, north of Parkchester, in that area there. Well, we were unexpectedly being hit by outside rubbish fires, car fires, nuisance fires. But when they were happening, they were happening in the middle of the night, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, which was, even for the Bronx in those days, very unusual. And the fire companies that were going to those fires were far from the busiest companies in the Bronx. They were the slower companies. So they wound up running all night on some nights, not every night like the South Bronx, uh, up and down Pelham Parkway, Astor Avenue, Lydic Avenue, those streets around there.
Now, I
And
just want to, for the audience's sake, because not everybody is watching this is familiar from the Bronx. Now, the streets that you're mentioning are essentially the backyard of Berkowitz in a sense. He lived in that general area,
he
correct?
lived right in that area, but we found out later on. Well, I'll bring you up to that point. This
Sure.
happened over this happened over a period of few weeks, but isolated, like 2 nights in a row, and then you wouldn't hear about it for 3 nights. Then it would happen a couple of times. It was sporadic,
And
but
what year was this? Did this start? Do you remember the start of this?
well, it'd have to be prior to '77, so I'd say '76 or something like that.
Okay. Could it have been as early as 75?
Yeah, it could have been. Yeah, I mean, it's a number of years now, so it's
Right, right. I'm not trying to put words in your
no, I
mouth. I'm
understand
just
that. Yeah,
yeah, I'm
I
just
get a point.
trying to establish that, it's possible that Berkowitz was doing these things for, quite a while before he supposedly met these people in Yonkers. But anyway, that's all
Well, I
conjecture.
agree with that analysis, to be honest with you.
Oh, you
Uh,
do?
yeah, this all happened prior to what we know now as Son of Sam.
Uh-huh.
This was an isolated Berkowitz cape, if you will. So anyway, so these fires were coming in, and when I worked midnight to eights, which was 2 out of the 6 days that I would work, I would make it a point to follow. It was very unusual. So not only myself, a couple of dispatchers followed up on it. And one night we got hit with quite a few fires in that area. And I actually called the companies before they responded and said, look, see if you can find out from anybody in the neighborhood if they saw anything. Did they see anybody? Did they see a car? Did they see anything unusual going on? And sure enough, companies were coming back to quarters and said, well, this guy said this guy gave us this plate number, he described this guy, what have you. And we had about 2 or 3 license plates of cars, which at the time we could legitimately run as dispatchers to find out the registered owner, because the fire marshals in the Bronx at that time were very busy and they had to get access to that information. So we had access to that information.
Uh-huh.
One of the few license plate numbers that came out to be to David Berkowitz, who at the time lived at 2161 Barnes Avenue, just south of Pelham Parkway.
Right.
Well, that may have been a coincidence. Maybe it was a matter of convenience on his part, but nonetheless, he was one of many. So,
One of
at
many license plates.
exactly.
Okay.
So we put that to the side, and then we how I came down to Berkowitz himself was maybe the fact that on more than one occasion we got the same license plate Different
Mhm.
companies were coming back and said, this guy who lives here said he saw this, and this is the license plate. And I said, well, and then at some point, I either mentioned to the other John or John Comp,
Right.
uh,
Now, just so everyone knows, so you, Jim, knew John Comparetto back then
yes,
in those days?
yes.
Okay, so you guys were all sort of like a circle of friends beforehand?
We got together.
And
Yeah.
John, feel free to interject at any moment. But did you know Berkowitz, Jim? Because I know that John was friends with Berkowitz from his circle, but were you a part of that circle that knew Berkowitz?
Well, John somehow doesn't remember this, but when John was a cop in the 4-6 precinct, he called me up one day. He said he had to come down to the Bronx early for something, and he was working a 4 to 12. Would you like to meet me for lunch? And it was at a restaurant now gone in the Bronx at 188th Street in the Concourse, Mother's, which was, I think, a Jewish deli, I think. And when I got there, John's friend David Berkowitz was there. So, oh, how you doing? And we had lunch, and I think I commented to John afterward. I said, "What's his story?" Well, Korea, the army, problems. I said, "Yeah, okay." I didn't make a big deal out of it, but he was a
Wait,
strange guy.
hold on. Right now, you just opened up something. Explain more your impression of David Berkowitz. So we can't let this go by.
Well, me and John were talking about the current things that we were involved in, the day-to-day things, and he was sitting there with what we call today is inappropriate laughter, and his, I don't remember if he contributed anything to the conversation, but you could just tell that you know he's on a different wavelength.
Now, John, this is the story you told us in our interview. No?
No,
Oh,
my meeting with David was in June of 1975, which was the first time I'd seen him since I dropped him off in 1971 at Fort Dix. And it was an accidental meeting. I was getting laid off from NYPD at the end of the month. And I think I had just come back from court, so they put me on a foot post to finish out the tour. I'm on Fordham Road, walking towards Webster Avenue, and Dave's crossing the street on Webster Avenue. I actually tried to make a U-turn to avoid him because all the letters we had gotten from him, and he had become I'm going to use the term Jesus freak Bible thumper. And friends who had seen him when he came out of service said that you couldn't have a conversation. You would look through his eyes to the back of his head, and he would be preaching. Every word out of his mouth was sections from the Bible. So I tried to make a U-turn to avoid him, and he's screaming, hey, John, hey, John. So I turned around, he came up, we hugged each other, hey, how you doing? He actually sounded quite normal. And then we went across the street to have, he said, I'll buy you lunch. 188 Decatur, I'm sorry, Decatur and Fordham right there was a diner. And another John R, I'll call him for now, happened to, he lived right up the block. And the three of us had lunch. And originally I didn't remember John being there, but after some discussions, I now remember him.
John R being there.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
And it was a normal discussion, and I was impressed. He sounded like he straightened himself out, and that's when I went to his apartment afterwards on Leidig Avenue.
Right.
And I thought everything was copacetic at that point.
So now, Jim, what lunch are you talking about now?
Well, this was a different lunch. I didn't participate in that John R, John C, and Berkowitz thing. This was just a passing thing. John would call me up occasionally if he was even if he was working. What are you doing? Take a ride by. I got this post or something like that. So it was not unusual, except for the fact that somebody we knew in the future, I knew in the future, became popular. So
yeah, to say the least.
Yeah.
So you think that might have happened then with John R, not John C?
No, it was John Comparetto. He was working. He was was going in 4 to 12.
All right, so Comparetto, you're not remembering this.
I'm old.
You're not as old as me, John.
But it's all right though. I mean, we're talking
Yeah.
about a lunch you guys had in 1970, what, 1976?
Oh, well, before it, no, it was before he got laid off in 75. So it was probably a couple of years before that. How many years did you have on the job, John, before you got laid off?
I came on in 73,
So
but
anyway,
I didn't remember seeing him after he came out of service. I had moved upstate. None of the guys, only a few of the guys were still in Carp City. A few of the guys had seen him. I just don't remember. Listen, it's possible I blanked it out after he became infamous. And let's also remember after he became famous. And I'm going to get to that later on about one of the podcasts I saw and something that bothered me. But after he became famous, I couldn't associate with him. I was a police officer.
Right.
But that was after 77, remember? So I just didn't remember that meeting.
So, but still, I mean, clearly these things happened, and it doesn't really matter exactly who and what and were there.
Right.
But this is interesting, Jim, that you had this impression of Berkowitz after, of course, the Army. The guy sitting there inappropriately laughing at what you guys were talking about. I don't know exactly, but he
well,
wasn't
whatever.
supposed.
Yeah.
Right, he wasn't supposed to be laughing, and meanwhile, before the Army, he probably wouldn't have had that inappropriate laughter, right, John? Like, he was like, it just something happened to him in the Army.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, all right, let's get
So
back to
anyway,
the
so to get back to the fire thing.
yeah, let's get back to those fires.
So I, having had that luncheon engagement, the name from the reports that I was getting, Berkowitz, I think I brought it to John Comparetto's attention. I may have brought it to somebody else's attention who recognized the name from that Co-op City crowd. In any respect, we knew who he was at that point. I think at one point, well, I know I told John that we had Berkowitz's information from the license plates and everything like that. And John again told me, well, Korea, you had problems, and I said, well, you may want to talk to him and tell him that we have an eye. The fire department has an eye on him. You don't have to go into detail. Just tell him that the fire department has an eye on him. So as I recall, John did talk to him, and of course he denied having anything to do with the fires, other than the fact that he had a radio in his car and he was following all these fires and riding around them, which didn't hold any water with me, but it was good enough, I guess, for him.
Right.
So as this was going on, it didn't stop. It continued for a while. Then one night, as I said, it was sporadic. And one night, myself, John R., and another individual who's mentioned that newspaper article that you have there down the
Now,
bottom.
before we carry on, I would actually like to show this article. Just it's in the thumbnail today, but here's the article that we're talking about. Is this the right page, or do we need to go to another page?
It's at the bottom. Well, let's see what we got here. Yeah,
Here, two dispatchers,
right.
James Fay and Kevin Kelly.
Right.
Okay, so now you're about to tell us this story then about how cops mischance to nail Sam on blazes.
Well, what happened was, again, going back to an intersection that John just mentioned, me, John R., and Kevin were coming back. I had worked the 4 to 12 as a dispatcher, and we went out, met with some friends, and at the end of the night, going home. I'm going across Fordham Road, and I'm about to turn up Decatur Avenue to drop John off. And the fire department announces the pulled fire alarm box on City Island, which in itself is, I mean, the City Island companies are the slowest companies in the city.
Right.
And I said, well, this has got to be him. So being on Fordham Road, again, this is a main west-east drag going from one end of the borough to the one side of the borough to the other. I got right out there. As I was going over the bridge on City Island, the car that was described when we ran the plates, the yellow Ford, went the other way as we were coming across.
And it was described as a yellow Ford?
Yes, a yellow Ford.
Okay.
And then I went to the other side of the bridge, made a U-turn, and to make a long story short, we followed them for quite a few hours. And
Hours.
yeah, well, we really didn't have anything else to do, so we started getting tired of it. But there was such, it was, we had the guy that we knew was doing trouble. So as we were following him, he went through a light. He went through a light that was green, but when I went through it was red. And a car from the 4-5 precinct pulled me over.
Oh.
So I remember I said, what are we going to tell these guys? You know. So I got out of the car and I told him, look, I'm dispatching the fire department. We've been getting all these fires up and down Pelham Parkway and Astor Avenue and the 4-5 and City Island. And he knew about it. He knew what he said, well, we got this guy pegged. And I gave him the plate number. And I remember he wrote it on his hand. So he says, so he's riding around here somewhere. We're just going to see if we can catch him in the act or dissuade him from doing something. He said, all right, we'll keep an eye out for him. So off we went. And we did catch up to him, Berkowitz again. And
now, he had no idea that you were following him.
Oh, I'm sure he did, because as John R. reminded me not too long ago, that every time we pulled up a distance behind him, he would take off at a high rate of speed. And we would just follow him. And at one point, John reminded me that he went up the New England Thruway from Pelham Parkway. And everybody take out your maps and you can look at this. He got off at Connor Street. And at the time, and maybe they're still there, was a few of those motels there.
Yes,
yes.
The hot sheet motels.
I was going to say places of ill repute.
Yeah.
So he pulled into the parking lot of one of them. And at first, I don't think I did. I think I went down the block and made a U-turn and then pulled in. And he was sitting in the car. And we just rode past him. And then we turned around and left. And then John also reminded me that I made a phone call to refresh my memory on the license plate number to make sure that this is the car. And it was. So, again, my recall is a little bleak on that point. What we did after that, I think we just lost him.
Mm-hmm.
And we thought maybe we scared him off, Maybe we did. Maybe he went on to other things knowing that he was being followed for the fires.
Now, I did hear this story because John R. and I are in communication. He's become a good friend. He does not want to go on camera, which I totally respect. But he has been totally open and candid about these stories. What he told me is basically dovetails exactly with your story. The only thing that he said to me that I'm not hearing from you is that he ended up in the back of a hot sheet motel, which you just said, but that Berkowitz got left his car there, or I don't know if you did just say that, like he abandoned his car and ran away.
I thought that he was in the car when we passed him. John may be right, but I'm not sure. I don't really remember. Maybe he did,
Now, the question I have is, all right, so obviously there's no cell phones at this time. You're not getting in real time that this is David Berkowitz, but you said you made a call, you got that plate, you knew, you recognized the name.
Right.
Had you already met Berkowitz at this point at the restaurant, or was that after?
No, that was it was after. If I met him at the restaurant after that, I would have said something to him.
Right.
No, I met him at the restaurant before all this started.
So now you and John R. then are riding around in your car, and I'm assuming you knew who you were following. You knew it was David Berkowitz.
Yes, we did.
And what was yeah.
Go ahead. What was your question?
Well, what was the conversation? I mean, what were you guys saying to each other?
If I recall correctly, I may have said, "That's that guy Berkowitz. Wasn't he a friend of John's? This John here?"
Well, that's what I want to get Comparetto in here on. How well did John R. and Berkowitz know each other? Were they good friends like you and Berkowitz? John?
John, well, the answer is that John was on the auxiliary police rescue with a group of us. And I think that's where I met John, on the auxiliary police rescue.
Okay.
And he wasn't part of our, there were like 6 of us in Co-op City who were inseparable. John was not in Co-op City. And by the way, I got a text from one of the 6, we'll call him Jeff H. Jeff is watching the podcast. And while Jim was talking about the yellow Ford, he said definitely Dave had a yellow Ford with a black vinyl roof. And
That's it.
Jeff H was better friends with Dave than I was before I came into the picture. So Jeff goes back to, I'll call him the original five. I
Okay.
was six to join that group, but John became friendly with the group and knew Dave through the group.
Through the group. Okay.
Yeah.
That's excellent background. And of course, I wonder whether this was the same car that they arrested him in for Son of Sam, because
It was.
that was a white or cream colored Ford Galaxy. How
No,
could
that
people
was
confuse?
no, it was the yellow Ford.
Yeah, it was yellow.
It was yellow.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they got it from the summons that
Right.
was written by a cop.
Right, right. It's just that whenever I see pictures of that car, it looks more cream colored to me. But you're saying
That's
that
be-
it was.
that's because the photographer didn't stop his lens down.
You know, it was
All right,
yellow.
so this is highly interesting to me. So you, Jim and John are riding around, and you know it's Berkowitz. John R. already knows this cat from the auxiliary police and this circle of friends. And so I don't know if we got your answer before. Like, what were you guys saying to each other?
Well, like I said, I mentioned it to John after after, for lack of a better term, after we fingered Berkowitz for the fires.
Uh-huh.
So he knew he in fact, I think he knew that there were people following for that reason. It may have been a conversation that came up with a bunch of us. I forget now. What was interesting to show you how this whole thing disappeared politically
Mhm.
was that the fire marshals used to come up to our dispatcher's office routinely, check records, part of whatever investigation they were doing, make phone calls. So it was not unusual. One night, 3 marshals came up, a supervisor and 2, and just as a matter of conversation.
And what year was this? Of you,
Oh
what,
well, well, it would have to be. Well, John got laid off in '75. 77, possibly 76.
so before the arrest of Berkowitz.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Oh yeah,
All right.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So we had, along with those fires along Pelham Parkway and that area, we did have false alarms, as I just described, up on City Island, and occasional rubbish fire up there. You got to remember, I wasn't working every midnight that this happened,
Right.
and some dispatchers took an interest in it. Most didn't.
Well,
So
here's a question, real quick. Sorry to interrupt, but I thought it was a good one. So I'm assuming that 24 Baby Bull means after the incident of you following him. Did the fire stop after you guys followed him and sort of fingered him?
if I remember correctly, after this John talked to him, they did stop, but not before other fires had taken place, which is what I wanted to get to.
Right.
It was one fire that took place, and the time frame of when I talked to John and the marshals, I'm not sure about that, but there was a couple of fires on City Island which did not ring a bell with me. But what happened was the marshals came up to our office, and I said to them, one of them, I said, "Are you interested, for lack of a better, in rubbish fires in City Island?" Usually, the fire marshals are not, because at the time they would only investigate arson as a felony. So
Mhm.
rubbish fires it was not arson; it was criminal mischief. So they wouldn't.
Right.
But much to my surprise, this marshal looked at me with his eyes open. He says, "You know something about rubbish fires in City Island?" I said, "Yeah." He calls the supervising marshal over and he says, he knows something about rubbish fires in City Island. So I'm going to, what do I get into here? So the 3 marshals, they take me into the kitchen of our office. They close the door. They all take out memo pads. And they said, "All right, what's your name? What's your badge number? What group are you in? When you're working next?" I said, "Oh, brother." So he says, "Well, what do you know about it?" So I told him we followed the guy, and the fires were going on. We had this plate number, Berkowitz. He lived on Barnes Avenue, and I mentioned John, but I didn't want to mention him by name because he was on the cops, and I didn't want the marshals calling up the cops. but I think I gave his name. I think they persuaded me to give him John's name.
Uh-huh.
So they carried on. They wrote it down, and my supervising dispatcher, made a note in a journal. Dispatcher Fay being interviewed by fire marshals regarding fires, and that was it. I'm sorry I didn't make a copy of that, but I didn't.
Right.
So
Well, oh, sorry.
go ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, the question I have is, was it unusual for 3 fire marshals to come in and ask about rubbish fires? Why were
No,
they
well, they
so
didn't ask me. I asked them. They came up on whatever routine investigation they were doing.
Oh,
They would go,
okay.
they would go through our paperwork and take notes of what's going on. And we would, one of the things that we did, not to get off the topic, was
Uh-huh.
that if people called up reporting a big fire, we would make sure to try and get their phone number. And the
Right.
marshals would call those people back and then interview them, and very often make an arrest based on what
Oh,
these
wow.
people would tell you. It was very so getting the phone numbers was an important part for us and them.
But they seem to, their ears seem to have perked up when you mentioned the rubbish
Yes,
fire.
and I'll tell you why. So after it was all over, I said to one guy, I says, "Why are you so interested in rubbish fires in City Island?" He says, "Well, one of those rubbish fires went up the wall of one of the restaurants out there, and the owner, parentheses, being politically hooked up,
Right.
made a bitch about it, and they ordered us to look into it, even though it was trivial what it did to his building, but it was next to his building.
Right.
So there was political influence to investigate the rubbish fire,
And
not
that's
to
it.
and
Right.
not to advance the thing, but when you see videos of Mayor A. Beam's closing of the case, that should not have been closed. You'll see A. Beam up there was surrounded with all the detectives, and Mike Card was the police commissioner, and he's standing in the front, and A. Beam says, "And this case is about Son of Sam."
Right.
He says, "And this case is closed." And Mike Card turned around and looked at him as if to say, "What are you, crazy?"
And
But it was closed.
and what did you take from that? Like, how did you interpret that look by Cod?
What are you, crazy? Because they had,
Right.
I mean, we know the whole reason why we're sitting here right now is because there's more to the story. The
Right.
cops knew there was more to the story, but the mayor had spoken.
So let's talk about that for a second before we get back into this fire. And I want to just talk about,
Manny, can I just make a couple things?
absolutely. I wanted to get you in.
2 of my friends are sending me texts and helping my memory along. So, first of all, John R. contacted me just now. He actually met Dave before the Co-op City crew, and John met him through Eddie Snedeker, who has passed away over a few years ago.
Right.
Eddie was one of my original 6. Eddie's father was killed in a fire. Well, Eddie's father died. He was a fireman in Engine 48. He had a heart attack at a fire and died in the line of duty. And Eddie was a fire buff before and wanted to be a cop. But John R. met Eddie from Engine 48 because John used to do some volunteer stuff there also. So he knew, that's how he knew Eddie actually before me. And Eddie introduced him to Dave before me and the group there.
Manny, better put up a chart, like they do with the mob,
I know, we're gonna have to start getting
down there.
Yeah, we definitely need to start charting this.
I also got to tell you, I got a text from Jeff H., who's part of our 6. Jimmy, you may know this name, but around 1974, a fire marshal named Aubrey Nelson came and talked to some of the guys in our group. And I'll read you what he wrote me. He wanted to take Dave in for some questioning. Ed came running over my house. My father ran over and told him that he could not question Dave unless his father was present, since he was a minor. And Aubrey, the fire marshal, actually lived in Building 1A in Co-op City. Now, what happened after that, whether or not they questioned him, I don't know.
Well, hold on. I'm confused. Go ahead.
So am I.
Yeah, and I think the audience is too. We're getting too excited. Now, what were they questioning him about?
The fires, starting fires.
But not the fires I was talking about. You were talking about Co-op City fires, right?
No, I'm not sure about that.
He didn't live in Co-op City when I was chasing him down.
Right. I'm not sure it was about the Co-op City, any Co-op City fires. it was about fires in general, is what I'm understanding from Jeff.
But this seems like it was years before Jim Fay's incident.
I think it was.
Well, this is 74. This is
74.
around 74.
Well, mine was later than that.
Yep.
But so they wanted to question Berkowitz. Why were they coming around? I guess you don't know the answer, but why would Berkowitz be on their radar in 74?
I don't know the answer right now.
Wasn't it had something to do with the fact that all those kids in Co-op City were around? Let me just give you a little background on Co-op City. When I was a dispatcher, two problems we had in Co-op City: nuisance fires, no particular thing; clogged incinerators, which the fire department went on, and broken water mains because the buildings were settling. Those were the three biggest problems we had in Co-op City. So when these kids, and I don't say that disparagingly, were running around at the fires, I think that's when that marshal may have attempted to interview Berkowitz in regards to those very early fires. Could that be, John?
Jeff, no, because remember, I dropped Dave off in 71 when he signed up for the military. I moved out of Co-op. I'm glad you called us kids. I was one of the kids running around, with the group, putting out fires. And there was a rumor back then, they thought we were starting them. And I had said last time when I was on this podcast that, there's no way. I mean, we were together day and night, often not even with Dave, often not anywhere near Co-op, and a fire would come in Co-op. So, and a lot of them were just brush fires, construction stuff fires. They I'm not sure if they suspected the whole group or just Dave. But there was some concern there. Plus our little volunteer fire department. I don't think the firefighters had any problem with us, but there was some issues, or they didn't. Somebody didn't like that we had our own little volley fire department there. But
right.
Jeff is saying that this is more after Dave came back and around 74 that they wanted to question him, and I don't know if they ever questioned him.
This whole fire thing and David Berkowitz is one of these big mysteries, and I'm surrounding this whole story. And I'm glad that we got have both of you guys on, because obviously important eyewitnesses to the early and to the later years. But they were talking about after Berkowitz got arrested, and let me just get this screen up real quick. They were talking about this guy Berkowitz is going around. He called himself the Phantom of the Bronx, and the Phantom of the City, and that he was going around lighting 2,000 fires. And then here's like a little excerpt from his fire log, which seems very suspect to me. First of all, it's all, and Maury Terry wrote about this in The Ultimate Evil. It's all in the same pen. It's all like really written very, almost as if it was all written at the same time. And like, could he have done all these fires in this time period? I mean, what's your opinion on all this?
I have my doubts about all of them.
Okay.
We got to, let's put it this way. If he did, some of those locations, like River Avenue and 151 Street, they were, that's right down the block from Yankee Stadium. There was always rubbish fires there, all week. It was routine in those neighborhoods,
Right.
But like 80 and Edison and Gun Hill and Mace, Webster and 233rd, that would, maybe not Webster and 233rd, but AD and Edson, Ferry Point Park.
Those were his neighborhood.
Generally speaking, yes. I would. They would. Enough of those, I would say. Well, there's something to it,
Right.
But you can't really make the what we would call the South Bronx fires attributable to him, because they were going on every day anyway. Whether he did it or somebody else did it, they were done. But those other neighborhoods around Pelham Parkway, not so much so.
Right. And what I'm sorry, John.
We had a saying way back then, if you can close out cases and blame the dead guy, blame the dead guy.
Yeah.
And in this case, let's remember when Berkowitz was arrested, and there's no doubt in my mind, I don't think in Jim's mind, that he did all the shootings. But when he was arrested, the city wanted to end that panic, and they were closing out the case. And why not close out 2,000 fires? close it
Right.
out. So
Well,
Right.
I think that's what happened here.
they didn't. Well, the fire department was not. The fire department didn't want to cooperate with anything. They put the kibosh on me because of that.
Wait, meaning what? They gagged you? They wouldn't let you talk?
Well, what happened was in 1977, I left the dispatcher's job. I got an opportunity to try something else, thanks to John Comp, and that didn't work out. So when I tried to get back as a dispatcher, it was rather difficult. I did
Mhm.
get back, but it took a while. But I did get back, but they wouldn't let me back after this broke.
Really? What were they
So,
afraid of?
well, they fires. What fires? South Bronx? There's fires in the South Bronx? Well, Fay says, "Oh no, there's no fires in the South."
Right, right, right.
So,
So now this, of course, is a very, some people are writing in here, this log looks fake, too uniform of handwriting, same pen used every time. I mean, definitely good questions, but clearly, Berkowitz was a very, very experienced person here. And of course, John, this bespeaks to your experience with him as a volunteer fireman. You guys had scanners in your cars. What did all these things, Jim or John, what did all of these things mean? Like work and time? Like what was this? Cute. Oh, I guess this was the borough right here.
yeah. Well, it, it, the question that just came up about it being too uniform. Well, he didn't. I would imagine he didn't just put this down. He probably had it either home or in his car, and he did it. He didn't do it on each run. He probably did it over a period of. So that's the uniformity could have been that. The first
But
column is obviously the date. The second column marked box is what was the file on box number that was assigned to the job. Uh,
how would he know all this
it went
stuff?
over the radio.
So he would have the radio in his car, and this
Right,
goes back to John Comp talking about you guys having your scanners all the time and being
right,
experts in scanners, right?
Yep.
Yeah. All right. So the box number would come out over the radio.
right. And what does it say there? 4361. Was it TAS? What the hell does that mean?
TAS, TA, IRS, TA.
ERS is one of those boxes where you push the button and talk, as opposed to pull the
Oh.
handle.
And he
Uh,
would know that granular, detailed
well, they would
information.
announce it: Bronx ERS box 2245, River and
Oh,
151
okay.
Street.
All right.
And
Wow,
unless,
Jim, you sounded so official there. That was kind of cool sounding. I like the
well,
way
I
that
made
sounded.
my living protecting the people of the Bronx from the ravages of fire, and I had to act. There's some of my voice is still on on YouTube. With some people put the recordings from the 70s up there.
Oh, no kidding, really?
Yeah.
We're gonna have to find those.
Well, I found one, but I didn't think it sounded like me, so I disregarded
All
it.
right, so then what does this work? So this column here is the borough, Queens,
Right.
Bronx. He even put
Brooklyn.
K for
Yeah,
Kings.
yeah.
I
Hey,
mean,
hey,
that's
Manny, I just got
yeah.
a text from Jeff. He
Hey,
said that
let's just get Jeff in this. We should just get Jeff on screen here with us.
I'm not sure he's ready for that yet, just yet. Might have to be another night. He
Sure.
texted me that Ed and Dave knew every box number in the Bronx.
Impossible.
Really?
Well, I mean, when you say every, I'm sure there's some they didn't know, but they knew all the key box numbers.
Well, so did I.
Right, but it was your occupation.
Occupation. Yeah.
Yeah, you
They-
weren't going
they
around
do
lighting
it from-
arsons.
No.
As we called it back then, from buffing.
Oh man. So the guy's clearly knows all these boxes. He knows the parlance. He has the scanners. Of course, all of these especially his experience with scanners is going to come in handy for him when he's going around and shooting people. Now, I
Well,
want people to
I just want to make. I noticed something here down the middle there, box 7139, 40th Avenue, 11th Street. That's in Queens.
Yeah.
You made that a 9-2, which is a false alarm. So maybe he pulled the box, maybe he didn't, maybe he just went to it, maybe he just heard it on the radio.
So in other words, this actually wasn't a fire for real, and he's putting it in his logbook anyway.
Right.
So
he may have went to it, and as we used to say in the old days, he took a mark for it.
what does that mean?
Well, he wrote it down. He actually went to it.
Went to it for what reason?
He heard it. They announced the box on the radio, and he said, "Well, I'm near this. Let me go I'll take a ride to that, and it was a false alarm.
Right. Of course, he would have had to have been in Queens
Right,
at what
which
time? What's this? Oh, 600. What's that? 4 in the afternoon?
no,
No.
oh 6 o'clock in the morning.
6 in the morning. He would have had to
Yeah.
have been riding around in 40th Avenue and 11th in Queens
Well,
in
that's
order to.
another interesting thing. The one below that, 0340,
Yeah.
a quarter to 4 in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, 4:12 in the morning.
Right. So
Yeah,
I mean, and he's driving all over the city in the middle of the night. Of course, that is indicative later of Son of Sam stuff
right.
as well. Now, I am not believing that Berkowitz acted alone. I don't think any of us really do. I think we all know enough now that Berkowitz was part of a group. What kind of group, we still don't know.
Berkowitz
But
all but told us he was part of a group, but he wouldn't go in it.
exactly.
You know.
But clearly this guy had skills to do the things that they attributed him. He of driving around in the middle of the
Well,
night with a scanner and,
I wouldn't call it a skill. I'd say the ability.
the ability. Correct. Right. Maybe skill is the wrong word. But I
John, let
mean,
me let me just ask John a question. Do you
yeah, of
recognize
course.
that handwriting as his?
Oh
his-
boy, no.
No. Okay. I was just curious.
Not that it's not. I just can't
Yes,
recognize.
I understand. Yeah.
I recognize it as his because that's all I do is look at Berkowitz's handwriting and his
Oh,
letters and all this
okay.
stuff. That's definitely his handwriting. He had a very characteristic handwriting in that regard, almost girly in a way, especially his script, which I found kind of curious. But yeah, this is really kind of strange to me. I think that we have had suspicions about all these fires. Maury Terry certainly didn't believe that he could have lit 2,000 fires. I
No,
mean,
I don't think he lit him.
it
But
would have been a
he lit-
full-time job. Right. So what
he-
would have been his reasoning then for writing all this down?
well, some guys just like to keep tabs of what they were doing. I
But what
never
about
did. But
right, but what so but what if he wasn't doing these? Why would he want to write those down as well? Not that you know the answer to that,
no,
but
I understand. It's a
yeah.
rhetorical question.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Yeah.
just the whole thing is really strange with this Berkowitz and this fire thing, but clearly you guys caught him lighting fires. So there is truth to this whole
Well,
Berkowitz as arsonist thing.
our investigation showed that he was a prime suspect in it.
Because you actually didn't actually see him
No,
witness. Right.
but we saw him coming off at City Island, which was
Right.
it's not an indictable thing, but it proved to us there was more to him than what everybody was saying.
Right. It's pretty clear. Now, John, do you have anything to add on this topic
Well,
before we carry on?
something interesting which may account for some character. Jeff just texted me and reminded me Dave always wore a green army fatigue jacket because he was in love with the movie Taxi Driver. And he would drive around the city. When he was driving around doing this, he always had his green army fatigue jacket on to emulate from the movie Taxi Driver.
Is that why anti-crime used to wear them all the time, John?
Yes, 100%. It was the same thing. That's nobody knew we were cops when we wore that. Although every cop wore it. Yeah.
That's highly interesting to me because he has been compared, in popular literature to Travis Bickle, the main character in Taxi Driver. And until this moment in time, I don't think there's ever been any testimony or oral history that showed that Berkowitz even knew the existence of that movie. So this is highly interesting.
Jeff has a good memory, and
especially
Jeff reminded me, and I remember it. It's a fact.
You know what Son of Sam heads are going to also there a lot of people's minds now are in cognitive dissonance. I feel it because mine is too. One of the Son of Sam crimes, the shooting of Lomino and DeMasi on the stoop in Queens on 260, I think it was 262nd Street in Queens. The shooter was wearing a green army fatigue jacket. Now that shooter it was this picture right here, which we're going to talk about in a little bit more detail. Give me a second here. I'll show you the composite for that one. Sorry. There we go. Now the shooter, this was the shooter, and everyone thought it was John Carr. We'll get to this individual in a minute. But interesting that Berkowitz had a green army fatigue jacket. That's something for people to know. But of course, Mike Martinez here says, I'm sorry, Maria
Yeah.
Martinez. Many people wore green army
Yes,
jackets.
that was a very popular
Yes,
coat. And
very
well,
popular.
you talk about Vietnam was still going on, so there was a lot of guys coming on with them,
Sure.
and hand me downs, and yeah, I had one too. As a matter of fact, I got it from a friend of mine.
Right. You know, I
I
think
still
boobies.
have it now that I think of it. My son's wearing it.
I still have my dad's from the army. I used
Yeah,
to wear that
well,
thing like crazy. Boobies for life. One of my favorite handles. One of my favorite names here. Jeff needs to come on the show. I think we need to relay a message, John, to Jeff. I mean,
I'll be talking to him.
he seems to want to be interjecting his opinion,
Yep.
his remembrances here.
Yep.
So we definitely, and of course, Jeff H is a name that we have heard before in Son of Sam Land as an early friend of David Berkowitz.
I just want to bring out the note from something we talked about. John R. just texted me a little while ago and said that when we followed Berkowitz into the hotel parking lot, John R. got out of the car to confirm the license plate number. And I remember now because I think he staggered through the parking lot to give the impression that he was just some nondescript individual walking through the lot. And then when he got the plate number, then I called up. I guess I don't know who I called, but I called up to verify that that plate was in fact Berkowitz, because I think there was a time lapse between the time that I had originally got the information and this particular following episode.
Mhm.
So
Here's a good question. Did Dave ever have different hairstyles than the one that we knew?
no, I don't think so.
I only knew him with the one. Remember I dropped him off. 71, and I remember when I saw him in 75, he looked the same. So
Uh-huh.
yeah,
So
I don't remember different hairstyles.
right, probably stayed the same.
Yeah.
So, before we carry on to our next subject, is there anything that we did not cover here that you feel we should get out vis-a-vis the whole arson and fire story?
Well, when they locked up Berkowitz that night, I was home, and the 11 o'clock news, they teased with the fact that they had an arrest.
Mhm.
And when the news started and they mentioned Berkowitz's name, John says it was a little later, but this was when the 11 o'clock news was on. I called John up, and his then wife answered the phone, who was pregnant. And oh, hi, Lois. How you doing? This is 11:30 at night. I'm calling him up. Oh, hi, Jimmy. I said, what was the name of the guy that John knew that was in the Korea, in the army? He had problems. She says, David Berkowitz. I said, they just locked him up for Son of Sam. Well, she started screaming, John, wake up. And that was, as to continue with that, later on, I started getting phone calls from the Associated Press, the New York Post, they're at home. And I found out that there was a dispatcher who's now deceased, so I'll use his name, Bill Pratt. Some newspaper called up looking for information on something else, and on the switchboard, and he happened to answer the switchboard, and he says, and something came up about Son of Sam in the conversation, and this guy Pratt says, we had a guy here that followed Berkowitz all night one night. So that's all. And every time they called up, he was giving them my name and phone number, and all
Uh-huh.
night my phone was ringing.
That's great.
But
Here's a
wait a minute. There's a little
sorry.
bit more to this. So after I got off the phone with the newspapers, I said, let me call those fire marshals So I called the marshals, and I remember the supervising marshal who I knew who was there that night. He used to come up quite a bit. So I asked for him by name. So he gets on the phone. I said, how you doing? It's Jim Fay, dispatch in the Bronx. I says, you came up to the Bronx one night and interviewed me about rubbish fires. Yeah. I said, do you remember the name I gave you for that? No, David Berkowitz. Yeah. I says, did you see the news yet tonight? No. He said, they locked him up for Son of Sam. Dead silence.
That's funny. I mean, but to be fair, even if they had arrested him,
No, it's Yeah.
it was a minor crime. You said it
All
was
right.
just a criminal mischief, unless it was an actual real
Building
injury.
fire. Yeah. Oh, an injury.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's not one of those things where I think that the police should have intervened and could have captured him before many of the murders was in the
Well,
terror spree up in Yonkers that was going on up on Wicker Street that we've been reporting about. Which Jim, I'm not sure that you're familiar with what we've just been reporting, but there was indications that Berkowitz was, doing, really bad things in his neighborhood many months before the arrest, and they
in the
ignored
park
that
or
too.
right in the park? Is that the
No,
park
no,
thing?
right on his street, right down
Yeah.
there on Wicker Street, right between him and the Carr household.
That Wicker came up in his letters to Breslin a few times. Yeah.
Correct,
Yeah.
correct. And we have found some very intriguing connections there, which we're gonna stay silent on YouTube. I want people to sign up for my Subscribe Star to check that out. Real quick, John took a little break, so I took him off camera. He'll be back in a second. So the fires were after his military service or before? Must have been
A-
after.
After, yes.
Right. Excellent question. So real quick, if there's anybody who wants to join the stream, I'm going to put in the thing right now. If you have any questions on this topic, on the fires and whatnot. And while we wait, here's John. While John comes back, we're going to move on to our next subject, which is, let me just grab it on the screen right here. Window. So, wait, here's a question before I get there. So we're gonna bring in Ralph Dude. Ralph Dude is a great stalwart listener of the show. Ralph Dude, can you hear us? There's sometimes a delay from when people hear it on the screen to when. So Ralph Dude, can you hear us? Nope, he left. All right. So anyway, if anybody wants to join in, that's fine. So here's our next subject, which it's really amazing, you guys. Hold on, Ralph Dude's back. Let's see if we can get him in this time. Ralph Dude, you there? Ralph Dude. All right, listen, Ralph, get your audio and video set up, and we'll come back to you. So you guys are amazing and an amazing resource for us here looking into these things, because up till now, no one knew you guys really existed.
Some
And
people did.
I'm talking about in the greater Son of Sam world. And now we're getting so much rich oral history. I mean, things that we never read, things that were never reported on. So it's unbelievable stuff. But not only that you guys knew of these, John, that you knew Berkowitz as a teenager, and Jim, that you followed him in a car, and you caught him, leaving the scene of fires. But there's a character from the Ultimate Evil that who went by the name Peter Shane in the Ultimate Evil. And we exposed him several months ago when we talked about the Rothstein files. Now, Jim and John, we're talking here about Detective Jim Rothstein, who worked with Maury Terry. He was an NYPD vice detective. His beat was Times Square and the sex trade, particularly child trafficking. And Rothstein was brought up to Untermeyer Park in the late 60s, being shown bodies and so on and so forth. Jim will be right back with us. So here we see a guy, and it's spelled wrong, Patrick O'Shanausi. That's kind of a weird name, but it's actually Patrick O'Shaughnessy. Now, this was a gentleman that before we continue this particular track of this discussion, I just want to say this guy's innocent until proven guilty. We are not going to make any allegations as to what he may or may not have done. But these two gentlemen, Jim Fay and John Comparetto, have had experience with this gentleman in their lives and have some stories that they know about this guy. So we just want to get them on the record with that. Again, we are not making allegations, nor are we accusing him of anything or saying that he's guilty or talking about anything that he had to do with Son of Sam. But here his name is on a piece of paper that Maury Terry had and gave to Jim Rothstein. These were all the people from Yonkers that they were interested in. And at the top of the list, 2 Yonkers police, John McCabe, husband of Weekar, and Patrick O'Shaughnessy. Now, let's show Patrick O'Shaughnessy real quick, his picture. Before we get into this guy, I want to get a feel for this guy. Now, here he is. Now, all of you guys, I've sent all this picture out to all of you guys, to Comparetto, to John R, to Jim Fay, and to a couple other people. And with universal agreement, and of course it says here, Patrick O'Shaughnessy, you guys say that absolutely that this is the guy that they're talking about right here. Yonkers Police Department. This is him.
Yes.
Okay. Now, there's another picture that goes around showing this guy here. Hold on 1 second. Whoops. My apologies. Here. And of course, this is shown next to the sketch of the killer of Lomino, of the shooter of Lomino Damasi and the Son of Sam crimes, which, and to me, it's a dead ringer. They look exactly alike. Everyone thought this was John Carr up until now, and it still could be John Carr, although I am thinking that it was O'Shaughnessy. But you guys are not sure whether this is actually O'Shaughnessy or not, correct?
That's correct.
Correct.
Okay, now here's a better picture of the guy right here. So this guy, you can't tell whether it's O'Shaughnessy or not.
I have my doubts.
Yeah, close, but I wouldn't give it a cigar just right away.
Okay, so and I tend to agree with you, because let's take a look at the nose and the rounded face, right? And then let's go back to that picture that you guys have actually confirmed is the O'Shaughnessy of that's in those files, and look at that chiseled nose, that sharp nose, and look at that angular face. So even though they look close, I would tend to agree that that other picture is not O'Shaughnessy.
No, I agree. And Pat was more of a chiseled look, like in that
Right.
picture.
Like
Yep.
in this picture. Right. And in fact, John R told me that he's a dead ringer for one of the Son of Sam sketches, the one of Moskowitz, the later one, which maybe I'll get up while you guys are talking. But I wanted to get a feel for this guy because, again, these are new names that are coming out to the Son of Sam community. We've known him as Peter Shane the whole time. And real quick, there's a couple things that I want to relate to you guys, because I feel it's very important to go through this to get the accuracy or not of what we're reading, in The Ultimate Evil. Okay, so here we go. So Weiss, Berkowitz, and a former police officer who I will call Peter Shane, who we all know now, he's referring to this guy, Patrick O'Shaughnessy, all belong to a police auxiliary fire rescue in Bronx in 1971 before Berkowitz joined the army. So can we talk about that? What's the truth or not truth of that statement there?
Yes. Yes, that's where I met him, in the 5-2 Auxiliary Police Rescue.
So you met O'Shaughnessy in the 5-2 Auxiliary Police Rescue. What's this police auxiliary fire rescue? What does that mean?
I think that's a misquote. There was no police auxiliary fire rescue. I mean, it was auxiliary fire. They had auxiliaries also, the fire department. He may have been involved, I don't know, with fire stuff, but he definitely was involved with the auxiliary police.
Okay, so this over here is probably just some mistake that was made. It should have said police auxiliary unit.
Yes.
All right, great. So Shane, in applying for the Yonkers police position, listed Weiss as a reference. So what do you guys know about, and I know that you guys have different levels of knowledge of this guy. So, you know, again, whoever can answer the question best should interject. So I'm not just asking any particular one of you guys. So what was the relation between Weiss and O'Shaughnessy, here named Shane?
I think I said in the email to you that Howie Weiss's relationship with O'Shaughnessy, other than the obvious that they ran in the same circles as far as the auxiliaries went, I didn't know anything about it. That was information that was just brought to me recently, that Weiss bought O'Shaughnessy a car, allegedly. That I don't know too much about, other than the fact that there's no doubt in my mind that Howie knew Pat O'Shaughnessy from the auxiliary police, but I don't know if there was anything more to it than that.
Right. John, anything to add there?
Well, I moved up to Rockland County in '72, and I believe I was in the auxiliary rescue in '70 and '71, I believe. And in '72, when I moved up to Rockland, I, uh, I drifted away from the auxiliary. I was still very close with some of the guys because we were also doing some work for the good guys I'm talking about, a child abuse agency in the Bronx. And then in '73, I do know that Pat became a Yonkers cop before I believe before I became a New York City cop. I went on I went on transit in October of '73 and then NYPD in December of '73. I believe he went on Yonkers months and months before me. So I had limited dealings with him. Also, it's only more recently that I found out that him and Howie had become very close. A lot of these things I'm hearing about Howie buying him a car. I heard they went to a wedding together, which I'm trying to confirm that.
We'll get to that. We'll get to that in a second because that's in this passage too. We'll get to that.
That I didn't know, and I'm hearing from some of the other guys now that they became very close.
So Howie Weiss and Patrick O'Shaughnessy were friends. Now, where does Berkowitz get involved in all this? Did you guys ever know of Berkowitz being friendly with O'Shaughnessy or ever actually see them together?
I never did. No.
No, I never did. And Dave, when we had joined the auxiliary rescue in 5-2, actually, I had first joined in the 4-5. I lived in the 4-5, Co-op City, and Dave joined. And a couple of the other guys did, and they weren't very active. And I had crossed with some of the guys from the 5-2. I transferred to the 5-2 auxiliary rescue. Dave wanted to transfer, but the guys they just thought he was a little odd and didn't allow him to transfer.
And this was before the military.
This is before the military, yes.
So people were catching vibes off of him before the military too, which is kind of interesting. But so Berkowitz didn't get on that 5-2, huh?
Correct. And that's why I don't know if he met O'Shaughnessy, it was not through the rescue, the auxiliary police rescue. And it could have been, now keep in mind, Howie Weiss knew of Dave. I don't recall, at least till the time I dropped Dave off in the military, I don't recall any meetings, relationship, or anything with Howie or Pat and Dave.
That's what I was going to get to next. How did Weiss and Berkowitz know each other? But you just said that you're not quite sure.
Right.
So now here's an incident that I think Jim might have some insight to, although not as a firsthand eyewitness, but as something he heard. So Shane and Berkowitz each owned 44 Bulldog revolvers, and although sources said Weiss also did, none was found in his apartment. Now, this is after he was shot dead. But detectives working the Weiss case told a reporter that most of Weiss's guns were recovered. Okay, give me a second here. Whoops. So the implication was evident. Weiss owned more guns. Both Weiss and Shane held peace officer status, thus firearms registration certificate, blah, blah, blah. So you had mentioned to me, Jim, that you had some sort of knowledge when Weiss was arrested, or there was some investigation, or
when he was killed.
Tell us that story, please.
I received a call from a mutual friend of ours, Ed, one night, and he told me, shockingly, that Howie was dead. Of course, I was shocked to hear that, and he told me where he got his information from, and so I hung up the phone with Ed, and I called Howie's house, and guy answered the phone. Hello? I said, Howie? Who's this? I said, well, I'm a friend of Howie. He said, well, this is police officer so-and-so from the 114 precinct. Howie's dead. So, oh, man. So I called Eddie back, and we went out to his apartment, and the cop was there. He let us in the apartment, and the body was still there.
Oh,
But we we started talking to the cop, and he was very forthcoming about the situation as he knew it. He never mentioned of anything about. He didn't ask us, anything about guns, or do you know if he had guns, or how many guns did he have? That didn't even come up. So to say that again, as John said, Howie's relationship with Shane or Shaughnessy, uh, other than the obvious of being in the auxiliary police together, I don't know anything about.
so John, just speaking as a professional law enforcement officer, so of course, what Jim just said kind of contradicts what's in this book. He said, now I'm not saying that Jim made a definitive statement here, but he said that he got no indication from the police that there were any guns involved with Howie Weiss whatsoever in that apartment. But
Well, I knew Howie had guns. I mean,
okay,
we would talk about them freely amongst ourselves, but the implication of this article is that Howie had a 44. I don't know, and
right.
that later on it was said that
It wasn't recovered from his apartment.
O'Shaughnessy gave his guns to Weiss. Now, if there was an overabundance of weapons in that house, I would imagine the cop, which he was talking to us freely, he would have said, "Yeah, shitload of guns here. What's the story with that?" He never said that. So
Right. But John, maybe, I mean, just to play devil's advocate here, aren't cops notoriously closed mouth? Like, why would he say to Jim, who essentially was a stranger walking in the door, would he necessarily talk about guns with him?
Well, if it, it wasn't part of the case. Howie was killed with his own gun. Okay.
Okay.
So there was one gun in that apartment we know of.
Right.
He was killed with his own gun. And if there was an overabundance, and Jim, I don't know how much longer after you got the call and everything, but maybe they had not searched the apartment yet and found guns if there were guns in the apartment.
well, I
Right.
don't think he would have let us in the apartment if the crime scene was still active. In fact,
Yeah.
he told us he just said, "Come on, everything's finished." He said.
This is highly interesting because this wouldn't be the first thing we found in the Ultimate Evil that wasn't quite accurate. We actually found out something today about there was an incident talked about about the Candlelight Inn, which we don't need to go into with you guys because it's not really relevant. But we spoke to the owner of the Candlelight Inn today, and he was in shock when he heard the story that was in the Ultimate Evil. He said, "Nah, it's a crock of shit. It never happened."
Where is that Candlelight Inn?
That's up in northern Central Avenue, sort of near White Plains. All right, so it says here Shane new wheat car. I don't assume that you guys would have any firsthand knowledge of that, right?
I don't know.
No.
Okay, I mean, but he was in Yonkers Police Department, and so was she, so it's a possibility. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Therefore, O'Shaughnessy provided a direct link between Weiss, Berkowitz, and members of the Carr family. So we actually can't establish that, given what we know, right?
I can't.
Okay.
No.
And Shane's ties to Berkowitz wasn't an old one. It would be established that Shane, Berkowitz, and Weiss all attended the Maryland wedding of another friend shortly before the Son of Sam killings began. There were movies of the wedding reception. They were there. I'd learned from Queen's assistant DA Herb Leifer. You guys were I'm sorry, Jim, I don't know if you were at that wedding, but no. John, you were, right?
Yes. But I got to tell you, I've had some of these discussions with John R. and he's been in touch with the wedding, we believe, was Ed Snedeker, who, again, has since passed away. And John has been in touch, I believe, with his son. And the son has spoken to the ex-wife. And
ex-wife of who?
Of Ed Snedeker.
Okay.
And she, for the best of my knowledge, she indicates that the wedding was not in Maryland. It was up here in the north. It was up in New York City.
Yeah, that's a little confusing because I'm getting two stories on that. I heard that story that the wedding was in New York City, in the Bronx, in fact, and I also got uh, people who say no, it was definitely in Maryland. But regardless of whether, I mean, who did Berkowitz know in Maryland if it wasn't Ed Snedeker?
Don't know. Don't know. I mean,
And
Eddie
who
was, our close friend in our group and everything.
and
Uh,
Ed Snedeker knew Weiss and Shane. I mean O'Shaughnessy as well, or Ed Snedeker didn't know Weiss and O'Shaughnessy.
He probably knew Howie
yeah.
from from running around, but I don't know about Berkowitz.
So in other words, we don't even know whether this passage is true here, but let's just assume for a second that maybe the wife was forgetting wrong and the wedding was in Maryland. Let's just assume that this is true here. What John, did you remember seeing O'Shaughnessy and Weiss there with Berkowitz?
No, I do not.
All right. I mean, this is something major in my opinion, because again, we as Son of Sam fans, in a sense, I guess, people who are interested in this case, we have up until this point gotten all of our information from the pages of the Ultimate Evil. And we're seeing here, speaking to people who were actually there and present. Although there is a confusion as to where this wedding took place, there was a wedding. We know that. In fact, I have seen partial video of that wedding. So, and the video is of David Berkowitz. So we know that he was at this wedding. The issue is I want to see the rest of that video. And even though, John, I believe that you didn't see Weiss and O'Shaughnessy there, still we do need to confirm that by seeing the video. So hopefully we can
Okay,
make that
just so
happen.
you know, I just got a text from, I'm not going to say any names, one of the six, another friend.
Oh, uh-oh.
And he just said, Ed got married off Gun Hill Road.
So a second person is saying now that the wedding was in the Bronx.
Yep. Yep.
So all right, great. So then whose wedding was this spoken
Well,
about in the Ultimate Evil?
my
Okay.
recollection is that there was a wedding, we'll say Maryland, somewhere far outside New York City that Howie Weiss went to, because I mean, he told me, "Oh, I had to go to a wedding," and I remember saying to myself, "It's unlike him to go that far away for such a situation. He would probably more likely write a check and send it to the couple rather than travel all the way down there." But there was a wedding somewhere way outside of New York that Howie went to. I have no idea who the wedding was for or where it was exactly, and I think that's where the confusion comes in.
This is
Okay.
getting
I just got
not only
another text. I just got another text from Jeff H. As we're talking, more stuff is coming
I
out.
love it. I love it.
And I'm going to preface this. I went with Howie, the Bethesda Chevy Chase Rescue. They had one of the most modern, up-to-date trucks,
Right.
training, everything. I mean, it's apparently Bethesda Chevy Chase is a very rich community. I once went with Howie for a weekend, and we slept in the barracks with Bethesda Chevy Chase Rescue and rode on the truck on jobs. Now, I just got a text from Jeff, Howie, Dave, Ed, and Lenny went to Bethesda, and Jeff remembers them talking about the fire department there. Maybe there was a wedding. Also, another name. Boy, I'm going to throw this. We met him. We had become friends with him. I don't know. I've lost contact with this person. I'm just going to say Benny B for now. Benny B, I believe he worked security. He might have worked security at Co-op City. I'm not sure. But Benny, we knew Benny from Co-op City. He was a little older than us. I know he went on to EMS, worked there for many years in New York City. But Jeff is saying that he might have gone there too. There could have been a wedding, but he remembers all of them going down there, but there's no mention of Pat going. He doesn't remember Pat's name.
Well,
This
that may have been the trip that I'm thinking about, and it's just associated with a wedding, the Chevy Chase thing. Everything is very vague at this point, and the time is so long. And but
you
I
know
don't think. Go ahead.
maybe we're getting, I'm sorry, Jim, maybe we're getting an insight into why this paragraph here is so muddled and confused for us, because maybe the people that Maury was talking to give him this information were also kind of confused. Like, was it the wedding? Was it this
Right.
Chevy Chase Bethesda thing? But I think that one thing that we can take away here is that it's unlikely that O'Shaughnessy, Weiss, and Berkowitz were together in this one place. I think we can almost safely assume that, right?
Yes, I would.
Unless they had something separate from our knowledge.
Right.
That could be a true statement that they were down there. It couldn't have been for Ed's wedding.
I doubt if it was for the firehouse thing down there either. I don't think
so we have another, Son of Sam community. Again, we're not going to answer this question now, but we have another mystery on our hands. Right. So real quick before we get into callers, because we're getting on an hour and 20 minutes, and I don't want to keep you guys. You guys have been very generous with your time, and
we may have to go into extra innings.
We'll only be a few more minutes, but I want to discuss just any anecdotes or just to get a feel for this guy O'Shaughnessy. I want to. I mean, Maury Terry has him as one of the members of this group that was going around shooting people. I mean, I'm not saying that I'm saying that. I'm just saying that came from Maury Terry.
Yeah.
Okay. Which is why his name is brought up into this in the first place. Did you guys know of, whether you heard it first, whether you saw it firsthand or heard it from other people? Did you guys know of any characteristics of this guy, Patrick O'Shaughnessy, that would make us believe or make it possible that he was part of this group? Because it says here, reporter Dan Diamond later quoted a source telling him flat out that O'Shaughnessy and Weiss were both involved in the cult with Berkowitz. They are all psychos who are intrigued by blood and death. So can you guys speak to that at all?
Well, he'd have to show me a lot of proof to convince me of that statement.
Right.
I don't know. That's
Howie Weiss.
Well, he had his issues, but nothing along that line.
Right.
To the extreme. I think I mentioned to you that my first coming in contact with O'Shaughnessy was with a drum and bugle corps in the Bronx, and during that time, he was in the drum line of the corps, but he wasn't a permanent player. He was like a fill-in player. And in fact, they used to call him Sticks O'Shaughnessy because he carried all sorts of drumsticks with him, and he filled in wherever necessary, you know?
Really?
Yeah. So they go on this trip for a parade or a contest, whatever it was, and I didn't go. But when they get back, they start telling me this horror story that O'Shaughnessy disappeared with another guy in the band for a long period of time, 12 hours maybe, and they had no idea where they were going, and they were way out of town, maybe Maryland or something like that. And not to bring up Maryland again, but they were well out of town. So they start telling me that, they were missing, and the guy he was with, he was not the sharpest knife in the drawer. He was a bit of, So they showed up after this long period of time, and he gave this outrageous story, which I forget, and whatever I would remember would be secondhand, of why they disappeared and where they went, what the situation was. And being that it was, for those of you in the drum corps world, it was a junior corps, the ages went from like 19 down to mid-teen age. So the younger people, they took it as gospel truth. But I was a little older and a little bit more worldly, and I said, there's something fishy about this whole thing. The adults, the parents of some of these kids, they agreed with me, but nothing was ever said about it.
Mm-hmm.
And even when the older guys would get together and say, "Oh yeah, O'Shaughnessy," and I said, "You still believe that story?" Yeah, well, yeah, okay, believe what you want. I said, "I don't believe it."
Right.
So that was, that sets the stage for me and O'Shaughnessy as far as reputation went. So take that for what it's worth.
Right. And John, any
Well, I might have mentioned, and I know it's common knowledge, the thing that puzzled me. My dealings with Pat were limited. I knew Pat, I knew him from the auxiliary. But then again, remember, I moved away. He became a Yonkers cop. I became a city cop. I got laid off. But what always troubled me was after the Son of Sam, I know that he was going to be called down to the Queens DA's office. They wanted to talk to him. And Queens DA's office contacted Yonkers PD. And Yonkers PD told him that Queens DA's office wants to interview you. And he came up with this cockamamie story. When he was like 17 or 18, he had joined the Marine Corps. And he was in basic training. And his father became very sick. And we knew that when we had met with him and dealt with him. And he got a discharge. He never finished basic. He never went in the Marines. He used a story that the Marines were calling him back and he needed to leave Yonkers Police Department. And they didn't call him back and he disappeared. So that's always troubled me.
That is very strange. You would just take off.
I just want to bring something up for John's edification. Remember John Munger, right? My friend that about 7 or 8 years ago, he contacted me and he says, I just got an email from O'Shaughnessy. And I had filled him in about what we knew about O'Shaughnessy and all his goings on. He says, what should I do with it? So I thought about it and I said, ignore it. And he did. So we never knew it was through a drum corps website, and they would old drum corps people trying to get in touch with other old drum corps people.
Oh, wow.
And so he says, I just got an email from O'Shaughnessy. What should I do about it? So I said, ignore it. And he did.
I think I mentioned also last time that somehow his name popped up on my Facebook as a potential friend. And I looked him up and it said living in California from Yonkers and Riverdale, Bronx. So I sent him a private message and he blocked me.
Was there, so we're seeing that he clearly is a secretive guy who wants to stay hidden in some way. But
then why reach out to all these people?
Well,
why make yourself? Why advertise yourself?
That is a good question,
especially or Facebook or something like that.
Especially reaching out to John.
Yeah.
Well, he didn't reach out to me. Sometimes names will just pop up.
Right.
Maybe somebody. No,
but why do that? Why put yourself in that public arena when there's circumstances?
Right. Right.
Did you ever hear any incidents with him weird with guns, like that showed that he was like very free with guns or anything, opening up guns, taking guns out, shooting guns in inappropriate places? Any anecdotes or stories like that?
Well, I'll leave. I know of one that it's actually third hand, so I don't want to get too involved in it. Maybe at a later date, if you want to talk to John R., he'll fill you in on that.
Okay.
That would it's another thing,
Jimmy, was it you or John with the Riverdale incident with the shots fired from the apartment?
Well, actually, it was both of us. There was an incident in an apartment building across the street from the 50 Precinct Station House on
236 and Kingsbridge
Avenue. That's right. And coincidentally, I had been working down at 911. I was working 9th Division Radio, which is the 50. And the job came in, shots fired in an apartment, this address. Everybody went. And then at the same time, while they were at the scene, I get these jobs that an off-duty Yonkers cop is pursuing the shooters who fired shots into his apartment at this Kingsbridge Avenue address. So I put it out over the air, 50 unit, everybody went, 50, 52, last scene going here, University Avenue, Kingsbridge Road, he's following this type of car, the cop is in this kind of car, he reported shots fired into his apartment, they're going here, they're going there, and this went on for a while, and at some point it wound up on a major Deegan Expressway going northbound towards Yonkers. So this went on for a while, went on for about 15 minutes, but the other jobs in the rest of the division were backing up. So I started putting out some of the other jobs in the 4-7, the 5-2, and I sort of lost track of that thing. So I called the sergeant on the radio. I said, do you have anything further on this pursuit? And he comes on and he says, Central, that was apparently a bogus call. He said the whole thing was bogus, the chase and everything. So then Al Aronson, who was a Daily News photographer who we all knew, we met him either that night or at a later date. And of course, the topic came up. What about that job in Riverdale? And Aronson, he was a gun buff. He actually got into the apartment. He says, those bullet holes won't come from the outside to the inside. It came from the inside to the outside. He says, and you know who lived there? That Pat O'Shaughnessy, he said, lived there.
Oh my God.
And
So,
we said, so, and then, all right, well, now what? I don't know what the cops did with it.
so this is a guy who who thought nothing of just pulling a gun out in his own apartment and start shooting randomly.
Well,
maybe to get attention, to see the response and everything.
Well, I don't remember hearing, as I say, I worked at 9th Division Radio. In those days, it was busy, but it wasn't like the South Bronx busy. I don't remember any other calls coming in from neighbors saying, I just heard shots upstairs, or shots at a window here, or there's a guy shooting, or anything like that, or anybody running into the station house across the street and saying there's a guy firing a gun. I don't know how this whole thing came about, other than the initial 911 call from somebody saying he was a Yonkers cop and he just had shots fired in his apartment. So the whole thing was
strange.
It was, and
Yeah.
when the sergeant came on, he says that was apparently a bogus run. I said, I looked up and I said, after all that, so of course I didn't pursue it on the radio, and at midnight I went home, and then I took a ride up there to the apartment to take a look. I was at a later time that I think it was that night or the next day we saw Aronson, and he filled us in on it.
But Aronson said that he saw bullet holes
in the window, inside to out, exiting.
Wow. Well,
I mean, emphatic about that, as I say, he was a gun buff, he had guns.
And Alan Aronson's name has come up. In fact, he was the famous photographer that took a lot of the photographs of Son of Sam. Yep. He lived in Yonkers. He lived on Bruce Avenue. In fact, he lived in the same building as a guy who we've examined in this video series before, a guy named Taco Grady, who was a major pederast, and who victimized many children in that building. He lived in that same exact building as those two. So this has been amazing. I want to just see, we just want to indulge you guys for a couple more minutes, guys. I know that we're running late, but we have a couple people in the queue here. We're going to see if Ralph Dude. All right, Ralph Dude, get yourself ready. And we're going to go for Pete, we can only see your forehead, Pete. Pete, there's a little delay in so he might not even hear that he's up. Pete?
Next.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's see if Ralph Dude's back. And if not, then we're not gonna deal. That's sad. I always love people
Manny, can you hear me?
Hey, Ralph Dude, how you doing, buddy?
Good. Just was putting the baby to sleep there, so sometimes you get caught. But
what's up?
I had a quick question for these guys. Since you guys have connections to Co-op City, I was wondering if you guys had heard about or had anything to say about kind of overlooked alleged Berkowitz crime, which was a stabbing of 2 women on Christmas Eve 1975 in Co-op City. If you go in Berkowitz's Wikipedia article, it mentions it. It says one woman was unidentified. The other was a sophomore at Truman High School named Michelle Foreman. And, I just wondered if you guys had heard of that or had anything to say about that, or if Co-op City residents had any insight into that incident.
Well, I don't. I didn't live in Co-op City, and I think something like that would have come to the surface at some point. Was there an arrest made in those 2 stabbings? Do you know?
Not that I know.
No, I don't think that there was. No, it's kind of weird. You never really hear much about it.
How'd they come to Are you just coming to the conclusion that it was Berkowitz, or was there something published somewhere that said it was Berkowitz?
It's on his Wikipedia page, and it
Oh
cites
well,
to a couple books and stuff
Yeah,
about the. It's cited. It cites to several books about the Son of Sam case. So that's what I haven't had time to go and actually get the books and check, but
I recently,
just
Ralph,
was wondering.
I recently read about this in Lawrence Klausner's abortion of a book called Son of Sam. And he writes about that incident that Berkowitz just got off on stabbing and
well,
stabbing and stabbing this Michelle Foreman. But you guys,
no
John,
arrest.
yeah.
No.
Everybody knew about it except the cops.
Yeah, no knowledge of it.
Does it? I mean, and also just speaking, John, from your law enforcement experience, stabbing seems like a much more personal crime than
It is.
shooting. Like, are there any insights there with that?
That's true. I never heard of Dave stabbing anybody. You know, any kind of killer using a knife is upfront and personal. I mean, you're in somebody's face. You're you know, and the more you stab them, the more it indicates that there's something personal involved here. So I never heard anything about Dave stabbing. It's a lot easier to shoot somebody from any distance. Also, stabbing tends to leave more evidence. You know, there's you don't realize that you with just emotions and everything, you could be leaving. Back then there was no DNA, but you could be leaving skin particles, hair coming off during a fight. Same thing as a fight. So
You could cut yourself and leave blood.
Yeah.
right, that's right. And
Right.
I never heard anything about Dave with a knife. No.
All right, thanks, guys.
Okay.
You're very welcome, Ralph. All right. So there doesn't seem to be anybody left. So we will say our goodbyes. Jim, John, I have a feeling this is going to go down as a legendary show. I was riveted to my seat here. You guys are amazing. And of course, all the extra little flavor from Jeff H was really great. Is there anything you guys want to say before we say goodbye to the audience?
Well, I just got a text message from John R. and he just reminded me of something saying that Al Aronson, I don't remember this conversation, but I may have heard it third hand. Al Aronson, I guess, just in conversation, said something along the lines that O'Shaughnessy should be looked at for Son of Sam. So,
That's highly interesting. And,
Aronson was really into what was going on. And if he came up with something like that, I would have to, whatever he said, I probably have to say, well, maybe there's something to it.
right.
But, that remains to be seen. Me and John can't put him in that position.
Right. Of course. John, any last words?
No. I agree with Jimmy said, and even talking about Pat. Even though I don't believe in coincidence, okay, I like facts and evidence. And before anybody points fingers, things can look really bad and just not be bad.
Right.
There's a lot more investigation that needs to go on here.
Right. Like I said, when A-Beam said this case is closed,
right,
and Mike Card turned around and looked at him as if to say, what are you talking about? This is an ongoing investigation. Beam wanted no part of that ongoing investigation or fires. He didn't want to talk about fires either.
Yep.
Exactly. All right, guys. Well, listen, thank you so much. I'm just going to take you guys off screen real quick, but please stick around so we can say our goodbyes off the air. I'll just be a minute.
Okay.
All right, guys. Well, we just had another legendary episode. These guys are amazing. Opening up a whole new world for us as Son of Sam researchers. We're finding out a lot of things that are flat out contradictory to what we thought of. We're finding out things that are confirmative of some of the things we thought. And it's all just getting more and more interesting, in my opinion. So I want to say thank you so much to the audience out there. You guys are really, really the greatest. I can't stress that enough, how amazing you are for me personally and how much I appreciate every last one of you. And of course, I appreciate our wonderful guests as well. Next week, I'm working on a show for next week. I'm not sure I'm going to announce it yet. So just keep your eye on Twitter and subscribe for that. So for the rest of you, I want to say good night. Thank you so much, and we will see you next time on Manny Mondays. Thanks a lot, guys.